Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, July 28th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election. 100 days until Election Day, and here we are doing a prediction between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Now, I've yet to release a prediction since the departure of Joe Biden from the presidential race. I've talked a lot and in length about Kamala Harris's electability and her candidacy in this election cycle, but I think it'd be very interesting to take a look at this race 100 days out, given that we are now working with a brand new Democratic nominee. Kamala Harris secured enough delegates for the Democratic nomination as recently as Monday. It's a very, very recent thing. In fact, 7 days ago, President Biden had just announced that he was departing from the race, and so it's something that is very new to all of us. We're in a very new position, a very new understanding of this election and electoral process, and Kamala Harris as a contender now has never been faced up against President Trump on a national level, but I'm quite excited to see exactly what happens in this election. So 100 days out, we have a brand new poll from ABC News today that shows Kamala Harris with a boost in favorability rating, her highest numbers she has seen since the 2020 election, and a huge jump on the overall national average here, going from being down 16 points nationwide to now only being down by roughly 8 to 9 points. So it's a pretty strong showing for the vice president, something that really explains that when she is up on the national level, voters seem to actually really like her in a way that many people did not expect. When Kamala Harris was running roughly even with Joe Biden on the national level and a head-to-head against Donald Trump, many people were concerned that it would be more of the same with Vice President Harris. But $250 million later, hundreds of thousands of new involvement in the campaign, Democrats are slowly realizing that that was not the case, and that Kamala Harris was in fact and is in fact a better nominee for president of the United States. Now, there's a lot of speculation around Kamala Harris and who she chooses for vice president. People are talking about Senator Mark Kelly, Governor Josh Shapiro, Governor Roy Cooper, many different people across the country, and we are really at a crossroads where Kamala Harris could do a tremendous benefit to her campaign with practically anyone who's in the top running right now. It seems that the final three are coming down to Josh Shapiro, Mark Kelly, and Tim Walz, but there are other names out there, and really it is anybody's game at this point. So with all of that kept in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at an election prediction between Vice President Harris, former President Trump, and really understand the state of the race today. Prior to this video, I made a video back after the debate talking about a Kamala Harris-Donald Trump matchup. In that matchup, I had Kamala Harris doing pretty well against Donald Trump, but still losing the presidential election. I'm interested to see how much of that has changed since then, and where we really start to see Kamala Harris with her strengths. And honestly, we are in an entirely different election than where we were in the aftermath of the presidential debate. A lot of the things that Kamala Harris was appealing for Democrats as the VP nom now have become mainstream presidential things that are appealing to Democrats. And so very different dynamic, but roughly a lot of states are going to vote the same way, which means that a lot of our safe states, states like New Jersey and New York and Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Vermont, all of these other areas are going to be very safe for the Democratic Party. No real concern here for national Democrats, and arguably so. I mean, we've really never seen any of these states flip away from the Democratic column in years, in decades, and it isn't likely that this election is going to be the first. So we're characterizing all of the safe states, all of the safe districts here. These are states like Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota for the Republican Party. Now, I want to make a brief note before I continue on. States like South Carolina, Mississippi, Alaska, Missouri, Indiana, Montana have a possibility of being less than 15 points in favor of Donald Trump. With that being said, I will say right now, I don't see an indication that they are going to be narrower. They could very well be narrower, but it isn't integral in understanding this election. We really should hone in on these 232 toss-up electoral votes. Once we get closer to Election Day, we can explore some of these safer states that might have indicators, right? If they are narrower than 15 points, it does indicate that Democrats are doing quite well. Same thing. You know, if a state like Oregon and Washington was to narrow down to 10, 11, 12 points, that would also be an indicator that Donald Trump and the Republicans were doing quite well. I'm more focused on the 232 electoral votes as of today, 100 days out from the presidential election. So taking a look at it, Kamala Harris has an early advantage of 181 electoral votes. Donald Trump is at roughly 125. Now, in my video yesterday, I talked about if Josh Shapiro was added to the ticket, what a map would look like here. There are a number of different reasons to believe that a vice presidential nominee could actually benefit Kamala Harris in regions of the country that maybe she wasn't performing as well in. Right now, we're taking a look at it from just the Kamala Harris standpoint. So all the added benefit of someone like Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly or Roy Cooper on the ticket doesn't translate to an electoral map like this one. So Kamala Harris is really standing alone here. I get it. Donald Trump is J.D. Vance, which is part of the reasoning why Ohio is going to be pretty, fine there for Donald Trump. But, honestly speaking, this has always been a race of the top contenders. VP noms do add a benefit, but right now we can do an accurate prediction without a VP nominee, and that's why I'm making the video today. So 181, let's get back to predicting. Let's focus on some states where I think Kamala Harris is really going to rebound and winning back some states that Joe Biden, may have seen struggling compared to my most recent prediction. He had 226 electoral votes. Let's talk about some of these states. Minnesota, a new poll from Survey USA, one of the best pollsters in the state, has Kamala Harris up 10 points. Reasonably, she's winning that state. She's winning it by 5, 6, 7, 8 points. I don't think she's going to do 10 points. I think it'll be narrower. I think if Biden was able to win the state by 7.1%, Kamala Harris should be able to win it as well. And I do think that in some of these states, she will run roughly even with President Biden, who had very phenomenal margins in some of these states, like Colorado, which went to Hillary Clinton back in 2016. You can see that the shift from 2016, almost every county shifted towards the left. What was the overall margin in Colorado? 13.5%, round up to 14. Very strong for Joe Biden, will be very strong for Kamala Harris. New Mexico, too. I honestly do think that Kamala Harris does well amongst different minority groups that Joe Biden, just quite frankly, was starting to plummet in. What we know about Democrats in 2020 and 2016 is that their strength amongst minority voters is what brings them to victory in some of these battleground states. That's why Hillary Clinton was able to win in New Mexico and why she did even better than Biden in Florida. There's a reason why Biden was able to win in states like Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona and Georgia. It was on the backs of minority voters that in 2024 were a bit more apathetic about President Biden. Even if though they were backing him, they may not have been as likely to vote as they were in 2020. And so Kamala Harris rejuvenates a group, rejuvenates an audience that Democrats have been really hoping they'd be able to come through and forward with. And this election cycle, I do think Kamala Harris wins back Colorado, wins back New Mexico by very similar margins, and does quite well, especially given the data that we were working with since the announcement that Joe Biden was dropping out of the race. Virginia, another state that I think would be likely blue, Maine at large. I think we're going to see a very similar 2020 coalition come back. The question is, does she expand on it? I don't know if she wins as large as Joe Biden did or if she wins it all. We'll see that by the end of the video. Point being, though, she does win a lot of the same states that Democrats were able to win. I also think New Hampshire will also move back into the likely Democratic column. We're not really seeing Donald Trump doing that much better. 1 point better in a recent poll, doing even with where he was back in 2020. New Hampshire's a state that I would count on if I was a Democrat. That would be putting Kamala Harris up at 225 electoral votes. Republicans at 125. So now Kamala Harris is roughly a 100 electoral vote victory right now. But of course, none of them are at 270. And we have some very, very, very large outstanding states. States that Donald Trump is probably going to do quite well in. States like Florida, where she's going to win. Donald Trump is going to win by 6, 7 points. Given the influx of people during the COVID-19 pandemic, the new registered voters since the pandemic, Republicans have been trouncing Democrats in every statewide race. Back in 2022, we can see that in the governor's race there, Ron DeSantis won by 19.4%. In a nationalized race where they had Democrats ran Val Demings in the Senate race there, very strong contender, I would say, in another swing state would have done quite well. Former police chief, former representative, very, very strong person in contention for Joe Biden's VP nomination back in 2020, obliterated in Florida. 16-point victory for Marco Rubio. Wasn't even close. Called it in many networks at poll closing time. So Florida, very much a state the Democrats aren't going to have that much luck in. I don't think on a national presidential level that, Rubio and DeSantis far, far, far outrank Donald Trump in terms of approval and support in the state, but he's going to do quite well. And he's going to bring their 30 electoral votes over into the Republican column. So that brings up to 155. He also has two other states that we can characterize as likely red, Ohio and Iowa, two states that have often voted together and in 2016 flipped to Donald Trump. Massive flips. I mean, we saw Barack Obama win the state of Iowa back in 2020. Context there, Obama won it by 5.8%. In 2016, Trump won it by 9.4%. So you're talking a 15-point swing from the 2012 election. Absolutely insane there. Donald Trump flipped a lot of voters in the state. You can see the counties. Just take a look at that. Look at 2008, right? When Obama won the state by 10 points, then it narrowed down to 6 points, and then it narrowed down to being in the negatives, negative 9.4%. So massive shift in Iowa. Ohio's the same way. 2008, Obama won by 5, 2012, and then red everywhere else. So Democrats are looking at Ohio and Iowa, really not much and many chances of victory there in 2020. Very same way. You can see that even in Iowa, 2016 versus 2020, any new counties for the Democrats? Absolutely none. And so 2020, really strong showing for Republicans in Iowa and Ohio. Donald Trump's not going to lose that, especially with J.D. Vance as his running mate. So that brings him to 178. I would say the only other area of the country I would characterize as likely red is Maine's 2nd Congressional District there. But other than that, not much else. Donald Trump won that district pretty strong in 2016. We can see Second district went to 7.4%. In 2016, it was 10.3%. Obama did win it, but not by enough to say that there's no reason to believe that it couldn't have flipped between 2012 and 2016. Obviously, the coalition was very different, but Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden have seen less support in the state of Maine than what we've seen for Barack Obama. And even though you saw John Kerry win there by 6 points, it was still an interesting race and one that was known to be a little bit more competitive. So here we are, 179 electoral votes for former President Trump, 225 for Vice President Harris. She does enough to, I think, win over some regions of the country. But I will say, I don't know if this election right now, as the election held today, make everyone go to the ballot box, if Kamala Harris does as well as Joe Biden did back in 2020, or if Donald Trump does as well as he did in 2016. I think he still wins states like Texas. I think we're going to see Kamala Harris narrow down the state, pretty insignificantly, but still narrow it down, Donald Trump win by 3, 4, 5 points. I think it'll be less than 5 points. It's a very similar trajectory we've seen Texas move over the past few cycles. 2004, Bush plus 23, 2012, Romney plus 16, then 2016, Trump plus 9, and then 2020, Trump plus 5.6. It certainly has been narrowing down, but I still think Trump comes out with the upper hand. Democrats are not investing in the state the way they're investing in the core 7 states that they've been focusing on. Texas right now is a Republican state, I'd say. So that brings Donald Trump to a massive 219 electoral votes, leaving us with the actual core 7 states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. I think Kamala Harris wins Nebraska's 2nd district. She's destroying Trump amongst suburban voters, going to do quite well there. So that brings another electoral vote in the column. But really, it does come down to these battleground states. Now, I think at baseline, Donald Trump has done very well compared to the last election. I think when you look at polls, when you look at enthusiasm, Donald Trump has it in his column for the largest we've seen since 2016 and 2020, right? Larger than where he was in 2020, 2016. That's good news for Donald Trump, especially given that he won in 2016 and was quite close in 2020. With that being said, I still think, based on the fact that we've been seeing Donald Trump hit ceiling after ceiling after ceiling in some of these battleground states, it really goes to show that Donald Trump is not this palatable, electable Republican that we otherwise might think he was. Against Joe Biden, sure. But against Kamala Harris, I don't know if I'm convinced that he trounces her in the same way that he did trounce Joe Biden in my last election prediction. I still think, though, he wins in states like North Carolina. I still think he's going to be able to win the state narrower than 2020. I think Kamala Harris especially would win black voters in North Carolina by a higher amount than Joe Biden did, and also turn them out at a higher rate than Democrats were able to in years past. It isn't enough, though, to say that North Carolina is flipping away from its Republican identity. I still believe its 16 electoral votes will go to Donald Trump. The state of Georgia right now, I'd say, is also a state that I think Donald Trump has the narrow advantage in. It isn't enough for me to say that Kamala Harris should at all be written off. I think this idea that Kamala Harris is not on a pathway to victory is not at all rooted in reality, because she very much has been turning the tides in just 7 days. I mean, we're talking very minimal time, and yet we've already started to see massive gains in approval, massive gains in the polls. Point being, though, Georgia and North Carolina do not seem to be as affected. And so these states, I think Kamala Harris, again, will drive up minority turnout, see similar margins to, Biden in 2020, except Trump wins Georgia. Trump also wins North Carolina, but narrower. They're on a pathway there. As of today, though, Donald Trump still has the upper hand in these states. Now, when it comes down to these remaining states, I think we're at a point where Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona are going to be really the main target states. I don't imagine the Kamala Harris for President campaign will be focusing as much time in North Carolina and Georgia as we might think. I think those are definitely states that are on the radar for Democrats, not the states that are necessary for a victory in this cycle. I think Donald Trump still comes out ahead as the victor in the state of Arizona. I find it troubling to believe that, Kamala Harris is going to be able to win in that state, given that she's down right now, even in recent polls, by 4 to 5 points. That isn't to say that someone like Mark Kelly couldn't change the trajectory of the state, especially given that Ruben Gallego is now outpacing his Republican opponent, Kari Lake, from anywhere from 6 to 8 points. That could actually have an up-ballot effect and help Kamala Harris quite tremendously, enough so that she wins the battleground state of Arizona. But as of today, Kamala Harris has seen a decrease in approval in relation to the border. So has Joe Biden. Border, immigration, right? All of these things that matter very directly to states like Arizona, very directly to voters in the state. That's going to do damage to Democrats, and unless they choose Mark Kelly, it's going to be really hard to counteract that. There's also downsides of choosing someone like Mark Kelly, who has a track record that has been characterized by the media as anti-union, as anti-labor. That's a problem for Democrats in the Rust Belt, but could be helpful when it doesn't matter as much to voters in Nevada and Arizona and Georgia. And so that's a whole other separate conversation. Right now, though, Arizona, I think, is a state that Donald Trump does come out ahead. But in contrast, I think Kamala Harris could narrowly win Nevada. I think she needs a good VP nom in order to win the state, and I also think she needs to do a lot of outreach there. I think we've found that Hispanic voters specifically are more excited about Kamala Harris than they were about Joe Biden, more excited to vote for her, more excited to organize for her, more excited to turn out their friends to vote for her, and so that's good news for Kamala Harris. And Nevada is historically a Democratic state. As much as we've been seeing numbers out there that show Donald Trump leading Joe Biden by a pretty strong amount, Kamala Harris, I do believe, is different, and polls have historically underestimated Democrats in Nevada. Right now, I'd say Nevada is a blue state. So that brings Kamala Harris up to the numbers that Hillary Clinton got in 2016, same number that Donald Trump got in 2020. Now it comes down to Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I'm going to say this. I think Kamala Harris today wins Wisconsin, wins Michigan, and wins Pennsylvania. But I think it is exceptionally close and still very much within the grasp for Donald Trump. For the first time this entire year, I believe that Kamala Harris is on a pathway to victory and would win the election if it was held today. Would it be the closest we've seen in a long time? Yes, not as close as 2000, not as close as that year. But I do think it'll be close, and I do think Kamala Harris could pull out ahead. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania very rarely break apart from each other. They haven't voted away from each other in decades, and I don't think this election is going to be the first. I think Kamala Harris has seen the most support herself with voters in communities like Dearborn, Michigan and Detroit, Michigan, where she has been perceived as someone who is a bit to the left of Joe Biden on issues like international conflicts in Israel and Gaza. We've also seen, too, that Kamala Harris does drive out turnout and expected turnout amongst minority Americans, specifically Black and brown Americans in states like Michigan, where it is the primary Democratic voter base. We also find that Kamala Harris has made improvements amongst suburban voters compared to Joe Biden quite significantly. That matters in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and, of course, Michigan. I still think, though, she will be in for a very competitive race. Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden, and these states are fully aware of that. Joe Biden had a grip on the Rust Belt, being from Scranton, Pennsylvania, knowing the state well, knowing the region well. That was enough, I think, to sway some voters in 2020. Kamala Harris will have to make her own case. I think she can, and I think she will be perceived quite positively. We've seen that in that region, too. J.D. Vance is perceived very negatively. I think that also matters. The VP nom is never supposed to take away, only add, and I think the exact opposite has happened for Republicans. With that being said, I wrap up this map here with a very, very narrow election. Truly speaking, 6 of these states could go in the other direction, and I wouldn't be shocked if they did. But right now, it puts Kamala Harris ahead at 276 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 262. A very close and competitive race, but Democrats come out with the upper hand. Vice President Harris wins the presidency, and Democrats are in a much better position than they were under President Biden and will be on track for victory this coming November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.